In the past, in advertising, there's a very sort of hard line there. The creative team comes up with the idea, and then you've got the production team that they hand it off to us, and there's this real separation of church and state. And we have been able to, because we're all on staff, we're all on the same team, we all work on these brands, we can bring our makers and the shooters, editors, animators up early in the process to help work with the creatives and sort of figure that out. And then we've kind of pulled the creatives in a little bit too, which especially for a lot of young creatives who have come up in this industry, like they know how to use it. The designers know how to use After Effects. Like they use cameras, they shoot. Like they want to be more involved in the making process.
Jeff's a good friend of mine, and he's been just a great contributor to the community here in Massachusetts and New England. So we're really kind of blessed to have him here leading this. He's been in the business a long time, and he has kind of a rare depth and insight to add to this conversation. So not going to take any more time. Please welcome Jeff Rosica to the stage.
Well, hello. I guess I can't say good morning. It's noon now, so I guess good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to just spend about 15 minutes up front here to kind of get things going and get your mind thinking about things before we get the esteemed panel up here we're going to have. But really, I want to thank everybody for coming, and really honored to be here. And thank you, Tim, and to the Mass Production Organization for inviting me here. It is an honor, and it's good to be here. I think I tried to come the last couple of years, but I seem to always be out of town. So this time it worked out, which is great. So I'll talk a little bit about what's going on in reinventing, rethinking. Oh, that's too big of a picture of me. But thinking about really what's going on in the industry. It really is a terrifying, exciting time. This is an interesting slide, this word cloud. And I grew up in this industry. Actually, I started this business 32 years ago. I was just out of college. And I remember things happening. I remember back in my career thinking, boy, we have to deal with widescreen digital and stereo, multi-channel, and how are we going to do that together? We can't upgrade everything at once. And here we are this many years later, and that's just a sampling of what's going on in the same year to our industry. It is unprecedented what's going on as an industry, and there's a lot going on, and we're going to talk a lot about this today because it really is a really interesting time to be in this industry. It is interesting, but again, it is terrifying. But I think if we're sitting here in November, I wanted to start this off by looking at trends because, a lot of people will make predictions about an industry, and there are always some people who are on or off. But what's interesting today is that people's predictions are pretty well spot on. And I think these first set of trends are going to continue to impact us, but it's interesting. So let's look back at what's happening and what people predicted. One of the things is that people predicted that media consolidation was going to intensify, that we're going to see huge consolidation of the industry, and boy, were they right. If you look at the last couple of years of what's gone on, it's amazing. But look in just 2019, what's happened here with Disney and Fox, and then Fox selling pieces to Sinclair, and CBS and Viacom are, I think, about to close their transaction, coming back together. You've got also just recently, the Bonjay Group has taken over Endemol, which Endemol is a huge production company in the space. And then, we of course know Comcast acquired NBC, and Disney has bought Marvel and Lucasfilm and Pixar and so on. It's really changed the landscape of our industry. And you've also got, all the people from FANG coming in too. FANG, by the way, if you don't know, is Facebook, Apple, I'm gonna forget them all. Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. And you've got those organizations that we as tech call FANG, and they've got a pretty good bite from what you can see. But they're also, of course, coming in the space. But obviously leveraging a lot of new technologies that drive efficiencies. These companies have got to find ways, obviously, to get efficiencies in these mergers. The second thing is that the view was that the demand for original content was going to be on fire. And it really expected this was really going to be a big thing in our industry. And if you think about what's happened recently, the streaming services themselves have completely changed the landscape of what's going on. If you look at what's going on with Netflix, of course, originally, and then Disney Plus, and now was it Peacock, the NBC Comcast going to call theirs, and Apple launched yesterday with Apple Plus. It really is intensifying. And it's interesting that I had notes here, but I'm going to change the notes I had to myself because I literally read an article this morning that really shocked me. It was actually in television broadcast in Europe that in the last 10 years, the increase of content creation has gone 65% in the last 10 years. But let me just sharpen it a little bit more. In the last 5 years, most of that happened. $50 billion is being spent in content creation around the world, more than was spent 5 years ago. 50 billion, think of that. That's an amazing number. And that's just at the high end of media. Imagine what's going on in the proliferation of video and audio in just communication and advertising. Now, Gretchen, will be interesting to hear her views today, what's going on. Everything is changing. And the increase is heavily driven by what's going on in media consolidation, but also it's going on for a lot of other reasons I'm going to talk about. But this is a big deal. And what's interesting is that when you think of the stats now, think of one that surprises me is that, you know, the new show, the morning show, was launched with Jennifer Aniston, and Apple is spending $15 million per episode for that. I mean, that's just shocking. I remember when we used to talk about $1 or $2 million being spent on a TV episode, and we were like, I think it was Lost was the first one that spent $2 million. $15 million on a TV episode. So it really is changing the face of what's going on. And even here in New England, I know there's a lot of productions that have been coming into New England to shoot here. And I think all around the world, we're seeing this trend, all corners of the globe. You look at also studio space. Tim and I were talking about studio space this morning, and a lot of things are changing. But in the studio space world, I remember just recently Netflix buying up every studio and every space available in Los Angeles. I'll tell you a funny story. Our European headquarters are at Pinewood Studios. It's a famed studio in London area. And Disney acquired the rights to the entire studio. Our headquarters are in that building. I remember sending an email to our head of Europe that said, "You're about to get kicked out." And literally 2 days later, knock on the door, we're kicked out. It's amazing what's happening in the face of this industry. It's really reshaping even little things like our real estate is changing. So I think they were right about that trend. Again, you see some of the specs are amazing. The third thing is they said mobile was going to be everything. And I remember myself thinking just a couple years ago, mobile, I don't know, am I going to watch a TV show on a phone and on an iPad? Yes, absolutely. Even I, at my age, it's like, yeah, this is really a big deal. And my daughter, take a phone out. Kate was going to come this morning. I have a 12-year-old. And she's sick. But when I left, I said, "Are you going to be okay?" She had her phone watching Netflix, watching Stranger Things. She goes, "I'm doing fine, Dad," and laying in bed. So mobile is changing everything in our industry, and it really is opening up consumption, because how many hours are people going to spend on the sofa in front of the TV set? I mean, that's kind of a capacity that the industry dealt with. Mobile has just opened everything up, not just for traditional ways. I know Tim and I were talking about a thing they did this September in a real social media driven thing, but I think it was Twitch, and the uniqueness that they had with that event and what they learned with that event, everything's changing and because of mobile. And I think we are just getting started on the impact of mobile, and not just on the content consumption side, but I look at what's going on in content creation and what people can do. Look at the Apple iPhone 11 Pro. I remember thinking when that came out and I saw the specs and saw some of the sample video, I actually said, boy, I'm glad Avid's not in the camera business, because it's amazing what the technology can do in just a phone today, and it's changing, and the way people can work remotely, and it's really amazing. So I think mobile did change, and I think we're just getting started in the impact as an industry. And again, if you look at some of the specs that's happening, the growth is huge. Look at the second screening. I remember thinking, second screening, by the way, for all in the room, that's when you're using a mobile device or another device while the TV's on, you're watching the show. And an 87% increase in people, or 87% of TV watchers are second screening. Think about that for a minute. 87% are multitasking using the phone or the iPad or the laptop. That's an amazing statistic. That statistic just 3 years ago was like 13%. Just like that, the industry is changing. And so what does that mean to advertisers? What does that mean to content creators? What does that mean to the FANG organizations I just talked about, or any social media company? So a lot's changing, and mobile is changing everything. And again, I know what we're doing from a development standpoint. Hold on. Wait till you see what's being developed from the content creation side on mobile devices. We're just getting started. So big, big change. Next one is, all this, by the way, wouldn't have been possible without IP. And IP, Avid, we started here. By the way, if you don't know, Avid started here in New England. This company was founded. Nonlinear editing was invented here in New England. And but we started as basically an IP company, because we basically were computers doing filmmaking. But if you look at what's happened, IP has really changed everything. Now it really is almost camera to screen to be in an IP world, and that changes everything because that BNC cable or that XLR that we used to connect things, that's gone, and now that there's no limitation to what we can do, where we can do things, how we can do things, and what that means to how we work, how we live, and quite frankly, how we consume media. So huge impact on the industry, and I think that we really kind of broke through that last mile, if I can call it, where we really can be all IP from camera to screen. And that really is changing. I think it's going to fundamentally change and is fundamentally changing the industry. So IP is huge, and I think it's just getting started. And 2020, I think we're going to see some huge changes in this space. So that's kind of what, if you look back at 19, a lot of big things happened. And I think in the last couple of years, what people predicted really is happening. And so when I look at predictions, now I'm going to do something I never like to do, which is, especially on video, when I was signing the video release, I was thinking, uh-oh, they're going to be able to play that back a year from now and go, you said this, and it didn't happen. But I actually think I'm probably, and I'm not the only one thinking this, so it's not like I'm so brilliant, but a lot of people are thinking this way. But if I think about the 4 big things that I think are going to change the world, I think what we saw in 2019 is just a start. So what do I think about 2020? And I'm going to be bold here. We talk about fake news and deep fakes. I don't think it's just a problem. I think it literally is going to subvert news. I think it's going to completely change. And we're a big company in the news space. In fact, Frontline here in this building is one of our users. And Steve, who's in the front row, we're going to get to talk to, works on some amazing programs for Frontline. And thank God we've got organizations like Frontline that can do that kind of deep investigative reporting and the transparency initiative they're doing. And it's just amazing what's being done. But I think we cannot underestimate, not just because of the 2020 election, but in general what's happening technologically and how people think. This is going to change everything. Fake news, people ask me this question, what's the difference? Actually, there's a big difference. Fake news is really people changing the information, changing the context, really not really giving the full truth, and they're giving a slanted perspective on a given situation. And so that's obviously a big thing we see on social. We see it in Facebook. Obviously, they're getting hit pretty hard, but it's everywhere. It's Twitter. It's all over the place, and it's even online heavily. And that's been something that has been going on for a while. I think the last election kind of brought that to the surface. But for someone that travels the world, don't think this is just a U.S. issue. This issue is everywhere around the world, and it's a big issue that concerns me, not just from a social media perspective, but how far this is going to go. And I wrote the subtext of this one with our people. I really think of it as a fond farewell to the Walter Cronkite era. I think back to that era where, when Walter Cronkite spoke years and years ago, you knew it was the truth, and you could count on that a lot of people worked very hard to make sure that they were telling a balanced story and telling all aspects and uncovering the truth as much as they could, like what Frontline is, his mission is. But if you see what's happening here, I think this is really going to subvert news. And deepfakes concerns me even more. And this is where technology companies like Avid and others are going to have to look at solutions to help. It's one thing to have things like the Transparency Initiative and people really being transparent with their sources and information and what they're doing. But the tools and technology can really manipulate and make things think what's real. If you look what's happening in the last year, what's popped out technologically. Look, if you're a production company and you have all those things at your fingertips, all the creation, all the Autodesk tools and all the Avid tools and all the Blackmagic and all the things that you can do, you can manipulate things, and you can take a video or take a person and change what they do. We are that close to the technology being on your cell phone that literally you could record what I'm saying here, go in and retype what I say and change it, and nobody will know the difference. We are that close to that technology. And I believe it'll be on an iPhone probably in 2020. And so it's a big issue, and we're going to have to look at how we track this as technology companies. How do we track this stuff? How do we put that kind of digital thread in things so that we can, so down the stream, hopefully people can uncover that something is not real. It's worrying, and it's something I think we have to think about. And I think it's going to change everything, not to scare you, but I think we as people around the world and as companies will find solutions, but it's going to be an interesting ride, and so we'll see. I'd love to hear Steve's perspective on this later. The second thing is we talk about cloud and AI. Get ready. This is going to change everything. everything will change in this space. Don't underestimate what this technology is going to do and what's happening in this space. I mean, we are heading into a new frontier in this space, and we're just starting what can be done. You know, a lot of people talk about, I haven't seen the film yet, but Tim talked about this film they've done, this AI film, and I can't wait to see it. I want to learn more, but you know, I don't actually believe that creativity is going to be replaced by AI. Storytelling is going to be replaced by AI, but I do believe that cloud and AI are going to fundamentally transform how we storytell and the role of people and how they get the job done. I think it's going to create a lot of efficiencies, the ability to, you know, think about the job of assistant editor. I mean, how that's going to really help assistant editors to hopefully spend more time, and there's one in our panel today, hopefully they can spend more time learning the craft and not just trying to deal with managing data and managing, you know, resources. AI can do a lot, or machine learning can do a lot there. But this is going to fundamentally change how we work. And cloud, the way people can collaborate, the way, you know, we announced last month or September that we had been quietly working with Disney on a number of initiatives where they could produce shows, Disney and Marvel, using cloud technology. You're going to find out the movies that are either just about to hit the theater or are hitting the theater now that were done in the cloud and nobody knows. They were edited via the cloud. The cloud followed them around the world as they produced, and their editors worked. Now, they did the finishing in a more traditional room, but they did a lot of the dailies cutting and a lot of the stuff along the way in the cloud, and it worked just fine as they traveled the world. So I think it's going to change everything as an industry, and I think we have to really think about this, because people say, oh, the security is an issue or this is an issue. No, we'll solve it all, and we are solving it all. It's going to change a lot about what we do. It keeps me up at night, because as a technology provider, we got to think about how we're going to leverage this and how we're going to change and adapt this. Really, really important. The third thing is that, speaking of security, I think media environments are going to become Fort Knox. It's a pain. Get used to it. It's a reality. We're not going to be able to avoid it. We're going to have to really lock down media environments. A lot of companies out there, including Avid, are looking at ways to do this so that we can hopefully, I like to say that security is the enemy of collaboration, because if you lock down security, you're locking down collaboration. Actually, yes, maybe in old ways, but there are ways now and new ways coming that we can really not stifle creativity, not stifle collaboration, not stifle the ability to work remotely or share information. But I do believe that you're going to see a pretty significant locking down of media and what we do here. And I think it really is going to become almost Fort Knox, almost like a bank vault in these environments and what's going on. And I think it's going to be some big changes happening, and you're going to see that, I think, across the industry. And this one, for all of you in the room, I actually believe we're entering an arms race for talent. And I think, get ready. When this kind of growth is happening as an industry, you already see this happening with, you know, I use the example of the show, the morning show, with it's $50 million an episode. Well, millions of that are going to 2 stars. But there is also a significant amount going to the below the line. And when you look at the big markets like the Los Angeles or London, you can see rates coming up. You can see the ability of jobs coming up. But that is starting to move all around the world. It'll be here in New England. It'll be in Kiev. It'll be in the Middle East. It'll be everywhere, because there's so much content being created. The growth of content requirements are growing faster than we can actually train people and teach people. And so I think that creates a world where talent are going to be kind of a free agent, and they're going to have the ability to write their own ticket a little bit. I apologize to all the managers in the room who are managing people. But this is the reality of what's going on in the space. And I do think there is an arms race for talent going on in our space. And it's already happened in front of the camera talent. And I think it's already started a little bit behind the camera. I think it's just getting started. So that's a good prediction for all of you that are hopefully in production jobs or a talent behind the camera. I think it's going to be a really important time. I think you're going to be able to write your own ticket. I really do think that's coming for our industry. But you know, it's going to be important that you get yourself obviously trained, because things are changing too, the way people are doing that. So that's my predictions. You can play the video back a year from now. We'll see if I'm right. And maybe Tim, maybe I'll visit a year from now and we'll say, was I on track? You guys either throw things at me or agree. I think what's happening is the industry is, you know, it's a crowded space. It's getting more and more crowded. We are democratizing media and what's happening, but it's also going to be hard to get seen and get heard depending on what you're doing. And so, you know, we've got to, as an industry, help, you know, especially the new talent coming in, but in general, help people get their stories told and get them seen and heard. People are looking for a lot better results. I know Steve's a very demanding person here in the front row in a good way about what he needs and how he needs to work. And so I think we expect that to intensify as things continue here. People need obviously to be able to change the way they work. One of the things we're seeing is that even though today's very experienced creatives, I also want to hear from our panel about new expectations, because we see people changing the way they want to work and what they expect out of the tools. They're expecting much easier interfaces and much easier ways of working and how to get the job done. So we think things are going to change a lot. So with that, I'll just close my part to say, I think what it means is that we all have to rethink, reinvent, and repeat, because it's going to be a constant cycle of change, continually rethinking, reinventing what we're doing, and repeating that cycle again, because it's going to be a constant drive for us. And as a company, we've got to keep with the pace of innovation. I think for people like Avid, we're going to have to move, and any technology provider, we're going to have to start to learn how to move even faster. It's really going to be an interesting environment, both on all parts of our industry as we move forward. But I will say this, and that's what I want to talk to Dave about real quick. I'm going to bring up in a moment somebody else from Avid. It's really important, and I want him to talk a little bit about, from a technology perspective, and then we'll talk to the users, how we have to think about building these tools. We've got to move fast. So innovation really has got to be influenced by a lot of things in the community, and I want to get some feedback from Dave a little bit. So Dave, if you want to come up, I'll move over, and we'll just spend a couple minutes, and we'll bring the panel up. So Dave is a vice president with Avid, been with the company a long time, a little longer than me. I haven't been that long. But Dave started, I think, at Media 100 in your career, also here in New England. And we used to work for Mariana, if you know the famous Mariana Montague at Avid. Dave actually worked for Mariana in the days. But he's been a long-time developer. He's been in the industry a long time, 11 years with Avid. So Dave, why don't we talk a little bit about what you think. There are lots of changes and things are getting intense. Kind of tell me, what do you think about this kind of shift, this intensity, and how we're shifting to that?
Well, it is quite significant. It's, just the amount of content, the amount of high quality content that has to be created, the trends that are happening that we have to accommodate, even on Media Composer. If you talk to somebody like a Netflix or an Apple, they are like, how can we get productions done faster? How can we do things in the box? How can we lessen interoperability? Just because they have to create content so quickly, turn it around, internationalize it. And it does have a very, very big influence on how quickly we have to develop products and how the tools have to get easier to use for that type of scenario. We call it the golden age of production right now internally. Yeah. We've been doing a lot of planning for the next 3 years, and we're trying to figure out how do we move faster? How do we go quicker? Because it is quite a challenge.
That's good. And I know you and I are in California tomorrow, and I think we have to face Amazon Netflix this week.
We do.
We'll see. I'm sure there'll be all new stuff they're going to talk to us about. So how does the community help shape? I mean, a lot of our community sitting here in the room. How do you think it needs to shape the way technology providers are working?
Yeah, it's interesting. We have found that we have to work so closely with the community. The trends that we're seeing are the trends they're asking us to deal with. And there's no other way that we could do this. We have to work in conjunction. We have to have a partnership with our users. It's just because we can't just go make something up. We have to make sure that because we have to produce products so quickly, we have to get things right the first time. We have to be able to make sure that what our users are asking for are what we're giving them. But we also have to look at trends too. We have to talk to the next generation user, particularly on Media Composer. We just renovated Media Composer. We just redid the whole user interface over and the whole workflow that sits behind it. And it's 30 years old. And the users of 30 years ago are asking us to make changes. They need to make content quicker, and they need their tools to be able to do that. So when we approached Media Composer and its renovation, we actually looked at products like Snapchat or Instagram, or you wouldn't think like a professional editing product like that. We would look at trends that are happening in user interfaces, but we had to do that because we know the next generation of user that's going to use our products are going to be used to using those every day. And it did have influences on how we approached our design.
Yeah, amazing. If you don't know, this team, when I became CEO, I challenged this team. Dave, what was it, day 2? Day one?
You walked in my office. It was day one.
Said, get going.
Yes, you did.
On this. So this team redid a product in 14 months, which was amazing. And they're just getting started.
We're just getting started.
So Dave and one of the team members, that was one of the leaders, Kate Ketchum, are the ones that did this. So congratulations to this team and what they did. So we head to Capitol Records tomorrow, and we've got an event on the music side, but also, as we talked about, a lot of LA visits.
We do. We'll go.
So what's
we'll
on
go
tap
back
there?
Yeah, so we'll go back and visit Netflix, and they'll tell us what they're doing. But we're also going to Capitol Records. There's another trend that we see. We just introduced a whole new control surface line at IBC, and in the summer at Summer NAMM, and we're going to show those off. A lot of the trends that we see on content creation on the video side, we're seeing that same sort of thing on the audio side. Immersive sound is a humongous opportunity right now. What we see on Atmos and music creation, on all the content that you've seen in the past, all those songs that you've heard that have been so great that you grew up with, are now all being remixed in an Atmos environment. So we had to look at that. We had to make sure our tools are going to be able to accommodate the trends that are happening in audio. And so that's one of the reasons we're going out there. We want to show our customers what
it's a big deal. We were in Nashville launching some products, and I got the chance to go to Blackbird Studios, which is a famed studio in Nashville, and they played a remastered When Doves Cry from Prince in Atmos, and I was like, oh, now I get it. It was like you're sitting on the front of the stage.
It was amazing.
And then Amazon has unveiled the Echo Studio, which is literally Dolby Atmos in a $199 box you can sit on your kitchen counter. Wow. When I saw that, it was like, whoa, this is going to change everything fast. So again, you wake up, it's like waking up and reading about the iPhone 11, and then now waking up and reading about the Amazon Studio. It's shocking.
And that's our challenge. We're trying to keep ahead of that, right? So,
we are.
And
they say they warned us, but they gave us like a month notice.
Yeah.
And we need like 2 or 3 years.
Can you support it?
Yeah. So
yes.
Dave, thank you so much for coming
thank
up.
you for having me.
So we've got a great panel, and this is real important. We have 4 really talented creatives up here. I want to bring them all up together. I want to bring up Steve Audette of Frontline, Woody Richmond, an acclaimed editor, writer, producer, whose work has been actually nominated for Academy Awards. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Thanks, Woody. Also, Gretchen, I'm going to get your last name wrong, Gretchen, but I think it's Taipei. Taipei. Oh, see, I should have practiced. Gretchen, thanks for being here.
Thanks.
And then also Pete Norton of WGBH Studio 6 is going to give the next gen users perspective. So thanks. So please sit down. So everybody, if you would, thank you. So if you would, just a quick 30 seconds on a little bit about yourself. Steve, I'll start with you.
I'm a documentary film editor, sometime maker. I've been cutting for, I don't know, something like 30 years, 25 here at WGBH, mostly for Frontline, Nova, and back again at Frontline. I long form, and I'm also a member of the America Cinema Editors, which I'm very proud of as well. I guess that's me.
Yeah, definitely. Woody, please.
Hi, I'm Woody Richmond. I started my career in narrative features, union assistant, and then started editing low-budget films in between gigs. And when low-budget films became micro-budget films, and I'm not a trust fund kid, I ended up having to change, either move to LA, which I didn't want to do. You know, being a Boston boy, you can't live in LA. I live in New York, so that's sort of
happy medium.
Yeah, happy medium, sort of. At least it's close to the East Coast. And made a shift to doc. And I've worked with Michael Moore on several of his films and other, I don't want to say amazing, but films that I really, I'm proud to have worked on.
I'll say they're amazing.
I'll say that.
Yeah, okay. Smaller films you might not have heard of. If you haven't seen How to Survive a Plague, see How to Survive a Plague. Editors, wouldn't you say that's an editor's film?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. So Gretchen.
So, Gretchen Typley. I'm the director of content production at Hill Holiday, which is a large advertising agency here in Boston. I'm the only non-editor on the panel, but I manage a team of editors, shooters, videographers, animators. So I spend a lot of time with you editors all day. So I've been at Hill Holiday a dozen years. I started there as an agency producer. And a few years in, really saw the need for leadership and potential for growth within our in-house production team, and has really grown that over the years to a full-scale, production model.
I'm going to ask you about that in a moment. And Pete?
Pete Norton. I'm the assistant editor here at GBH for the Studio 6 department, in charge of the lifestyle programming. So we do a lot of the cooking and travel shows, things like that. I'm in charge of the media management and keeping the edits on schedule. So ingesting all the footage, making sure everything's organized and ready, set up for the editors when they need it to keep our shows going.
Well, that's great. Well, again, thanks everybody. Really appreciate you spending time this weekend. And on a beautiful day, as Tim said, we're in here. So Gretchen, you kind of hinted to it. And you've I think you've reinvented Hill Holiday's production and you created Brigade. What was that aha moment for you, or kind of, maybe it wasn't one moment, but maybe talk a little bit about how you got to what you did.
Yeah, so Hill Holiday has been around for 51 years. We are a great creative shop. Clients know us to be able to make big campaigns, big branding, and we can, we can make $1 million TV spot. Clearly that's changing. We need to make a lot more than that. Clients are looking for more stuff. They're looking for it faster. They're looking for it cheaper. That old good, fast, cheap pick two situation is not happening anymore. It's got to be good, fast, cheap all the time. So I would say the kind of aha moment came around, it was a few years ago, and we had a new client, Party City, and we had just finished their Halloween TV spot, and Halloween is like the Super Bowl for Party City. And they loved it. It was great. It was this awesome, cool spot, lots of great costumes in it. And then the client was like, all right, this is great, but we have a lot of stuff we need to sell, and we need to saturate the market with product, and it's Halloween, and then we're going to move into Thanksgiving, and then Christmas, Hanukkah, New Year's, and we got to make all the stuff, and can you guys make that? And we realized as an agency, we were putting video content production through the same machine and the same model for these big budget TV commercials, and then we get these little small assignments, and we were going through the same process, and that's slow, and there's a lot of people involved, and it's expensive. So I kind of raised my hand to go in a deep dive across the agency and figure out how do we do this quicker. So I was looking at, what are the key steps in the process that we really need? What can we cut out? Who are the players that we can really empower, or how can we bring in players that can play multiple roles in the process? But for me, really, the key piece of it was we need an in-house team of makers who have the tools and the resources and the talent to be able to make this stuff quickly and reactively. And that was how Brigade was really built and grown, sort of react to this quick turn content. And we've really grown over the years to be able to create lots of different types of content. So we can do these quick turn things. We've got our studio and our space in-house that we can make a quick thing for you, but we can also do longer documentary pieces. We're also now shooting and editing and producing full-scale broadcast TV campaigns as well.
Wow. How have you dealt with the creative mix shift? Because it's obviously been a big shift when you've had to do so many different things. How have you dealt with that in really building the skills of the team and being able to deal with such a wide variety of creative outputs you have to deliver?
Yeah, well, we've got a great people on staff that play multiple roles. So people who are shooters are also editors, and producers who can play different roles too. And one of the things that's been really cool and interesting in this process is getting more collaborative with the creative teams and sort of blurring that line between the creative and the maker, which in the past in advertising, there's a very sort of hard line there. The creative team comes up with the idea, and then you've got the production team that they hand it off to us, and there's this real separation of church and state. And we have been able to, because we're all on staff, we're all on the same team, we all work on these brands, we can bring our makers and the shooters, editors, animators up early in the process to help work with the creatives and sort of figure that out. And then we've kind of pulled the creatives in a little bit too, which especially for a lot of young creatives who have come up in this industry, they know how to use it. The designers know how to use After Effects. They use cameras, they shoot. They want to be more involved in the making process. So it's been really cool to bring that collaboration together, and makes it faster and more efficient too.
It's interesting to hear that, because I know we've seen a trend that we call it the Swiss Army knife trend. And I think
Oh yeah,
in the
I
production
love those
community,
Swiss Army knife people.
it's people want to do it all, and it's
Yeah.
really changing the way, and it's changing the way they want to interact with the tools and what the tools need to do. Well, that's great questions. Let me ask everyone across the panel. Maybe we'll go left to right. Steve, so how are you keeping pace with all the creation demand and what's going on? I know you guys have some amazing deadlines you have to deal with sometimes. Maybe talk a little bit about how has that fundamentally changed what you're doing?
Well, it has really changed, and it's I mean, just one perspective. When I started editing long-form documentary, a typical frontline would take anywhere from 10 to 12 weeks to edit for 51 minutes of content. That's now down to less than 6 weeks. So that's just been a huge crunch, but with the same intensity needed for the content at the other end. On top of that, it's no longer just the broadcast. It's now all the digital outlets too, all the FANG, which I love that. FANG, did I say
FANG,
right?
yeah, FANG.
I'm loving that as a concept. And so we've had to, what's happened is, and this is we've kind of, the team has had to get broader and more diverse in their skill sets. So we're no longer saying, okay, you're just going to do all the animation After Effects guys. You're just going to do all the colorists. You're just going to do all the mixing. We still have those people there for the important stuff, but like I'm sure just like at your facility, that's now spread amongst many people. My assistant editor is my effects editor now. My assistant editor does the first pass on sound design because I don't have the time to do it all. I used to work just as the assistant editor and the editor. Now I have two people. I have two assistant editors, and Pete and I are working on another project together. So it's 3 assistant editors feeding me as an editor in the booth, right? So that's one way it's spread. And then the other thing is we have to really think about the content creation. So when we, at Frontline, can I talk a little bit about transparency?
You can,
All right, I
please,
don't mean to
please
take up so much time, but we have this, because of the fake news universe, maybe we can do more detail later, but we have this product now called the Transparency Project, which is basically takes our interviews. We've always published our interviews on the web as a sort of a accountability measure for our content, programming content. But now what we're saying is we're taking advantage of FANG and saying, okay, we can put some of that content down these other streams and broaden our audience and broaden our exposure to create a better democracy, basically. And so now if you go on YouTube, you'll see the interviews that we just did for the immigration show I just finished. All kinds of people from, one side of the spectrum is Steve Bannon and Ann Coulter to another side, which is the head of ICE. There'll be the whole gambit of voices out there. Their interviews in full, uninterrupted, edited down slightly so that they're watchable, but not for content. And so we have to do that. We have to broaden. We have to think about who's our audience. There's our whole social media aspect, which out there putting out little 1 minute or 30-second little bits every second for Instagram or Facebook or stuff like that. And those are all distributed inside the Frontline to a bunch of people who are all cross-pollinating. So that's how we're dealing with it. Sort of.
Wow, Woody, how about your area?
Sorry, could you repeat the
Well,
question?
just the demands that you see demands in your space that it's squeezing your time or your process. How are you dealing with this increasing demand for content, or is it not really shaping when you're in your documentary area?
Yeah, I mean, speed, the fast, cheap, good thing. I still believe that you can only get 2.
Me too.
But my clients don't.
Yeah, I know,
No,
and neither do
I
my
agree. Everyone still wants all 3.
and neither do my producers. But the fact of the matter is, like, I'm an editor of long form stuff that ideally people might watch in a dark room with other people, and my main job is to sort of be an emotional and sort of spiritual guide through the story, so that can't be rushed. And we all think we're smart, right? But do we know how everyone in a room this big is going to react to the content that we create? So, if I have like How to Survive a Plague, for instance, we had 800 hours of archival footage, maybe 1,000 hours of archival footage. How many weeks, if I'm working 50 hours a week, does it take for me to put my eyes on every single piece of that footage? So how quick can I really be? So one thing that I definitely like to do, which has nothing to do with speed or demand, is show the movie in process to a room full of people and see how they feel and see how they shift in their seats and see when they're like bored. And that stuff that, tell me about AI. Can AI tell me when the lean forward moment is, or You know, because I would love that if I
Yeah.
could just cut,
Yeah.
and I don't want to eliminate the audience because we're ultimately, aren't we all making stuff for people to watch? You know, we're talking about content as a commodity, right? That people want to buy, and there's a big demand for it. But ultimately, it's about wanting an audience to see it, experience it, feel something, learn something. So, I don't know. There's a lot of talk about speed and efficiency, and I do appreciate that now I can have my Avid in my bag. You know, when I started out, it was film, and then Avid was the whole front room, you know, was the drive space for you know, we had to have a room for drives, you know. Anyhow.
How long is it edit for you? How long typically? For
Okay.
the Ken Burns stuff, how long?
Okay, so I'm on an Ali project. Ken and his daughter Sarah and her husband David are doing an Ali project. I got hired last September to start this September, and we're gonna be on it through 16 months. Yeah. You know, it's the longest job I've ever had professionally.
Yeah.
It used to be for a doc about a year to make a doc that would go to Sundance and win, that would get nominated for an Oscar. Now producers want it to be, you know, 6 months. Can you do it in 6? I'm like,
3. Yeah,
you do it in 3. I'm like, yeah, if you want to go straight to someone's phone and never win an award and blah, 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 you know, maybe I can do it.
Yeah.
So anyhow, this is totally opposite of what you're talking about.
Yeah, but it's okay because I mean, if I can, just because the thing is that that's the spectrum, right? So Ken Burns has who wouldn't want Ken Burns' budget? So
exactly.
It's
or Michael Moore's.
Or Michael Moore's budget, exactly. But at the same time, there is that part of the scale.
Yeah.
But the fact is that part of the scale can survive because of there's enough viewership. This goes back to what you were saying, the exploding amount of content needed. There's so much content need that there are enough viewers out there who will appreciate the work it takes in to do a Ken Burns piece that versus you know, something that's done for a YouTube channel about someone's sail down to the Caribbean. I mean, that's one side where it's only 12 minutes long on Fang, or versus I don't know how long. 4-part.
2 hours
6.
apart.
You know, 8 hours worth of content on Ken Burns' side. So there's the shrinking down of time due to financial pressures and also the spread of distribution for content, but there's also still this overwhelming, this is what you mentioned, the overwhelming need for content creation, and Ken Burns is right in the sweet spot for that.
Yeah.
He just happens to be.
I don't know if this is the time to talk about it too, but I would definitely like to talk about how I came up compared to how you came up. Or are coming up, and how many? You said I am the assistant. Like, how many other assistants are there?
Yeah, so for my department is probably one of the smallest departments in GBH, but we are actually responsible for more program hours than any other department.
Yeah.
So on a weekly basis, I'm juggling probably between 5 and 10 projects for up to 4 or 5 different editors.
And you are
and I'm the
only one.
Yeah.
And there's no apprentices or interns or
Nope. We have interns. They tend to do more production stuff than post-production stuff, so it generally comes down to me to keep all the shows on track.
So like that whole passing down of knowledge that you were talking about teaching, like part of the problem is there's only one. Like when I started in film, to cut in film required a team, right? So just like the production side is a team where people are working together, post-production had to be a team. And it was intergenerational. So, you know, like I was in my 20s, the editor was in their 50s or 60s, maybe, and they had been an apprentice under someone who had worked in silent film. So there was this whole institutional passing down of story. I'm 49, so, you know. This whole
We're not going to talk about how old I am.
Yeah. But there's this whole institutional passing down of storytelling knowledge that's been lost.
Yeah.
And I definitely can think of ways that technology can bring that back in, you know, with social networking. The thing that you're doing with Avid Link, you know, where that's popping up every day. If I could like have a virtual lunch with someone and show them a cut, you know, and they can show me theirs and we can talk. You know, instead of feeling alone in a room with a computer,
Yeah, we
I
spend a
could-
lot of time in dark rooms.
yeah.
That's actually a good idea. Dave Calantoni's listening. I hope he's
Yeah.
taking notes.
Well,
but,
I'll talk to you guys more about it afterwards. But
Yes.
I mean, it would be great because that was one of the greatest things about my early days. Like at lunch, we would watch what the editor had been working on, and we would talk together about it, and that definitely added to the experience. Dailies also, this whole instant dailies thing. Like every day, part of our job was preparing dailies, and we would watch dailies with the DP, with other members of the team, production design, et cetera, et cetera. So even when I was your age, like, I mean, my first jobs, I was watching footage from the first day of principal photography, and I was packing up the room at the end of the mix. So like, it was film school, and there were multiple apprentices on every film having that experience. And I think that as we're moving forward, rushing, we got to look backwards also to some of the things that we're losing, because I think, you know, if there's more and more demand for content and less people who have that institutional historical knowledge of how to tell a story with pictures and sound, then we have a problem.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think it's a challenge we have as this talent race is on, and I think the demand is bigger than the supply. Yeah. So there's some issues. So actually, it's a nice intro over, Pete, to you. So I think, you know, how is this impacting all of this that's going on? What do you see in your position? And you're a newcomer in the industry. What do you
Yeah, so
feel?
for me, the most important thing is efficiency to get these things done, because I can't, if I'm kind of held up doing one thing for one project, I've got two other editors waiting on things for me, and that slows down their edits, which then compiles on. So the more efficient I can do things to keep things rolling, that's really where like my focus is. And it has definitely become easier in the last 5 years while I've been in the industry to kind of streamline certain things, and being able to work remotely somewhat while keeping the like transcodes going while I'm off doing something else, and being able to check in on certain things and do kind of screen shares so I can be working on multiple computers while sitting in front of one. I think that's really what has been the biggest thing for me.
How do you feel? So Woody made a good point here about, you know, how technology is also changing what's happening, or, you know, the way people are working. You know, you're in this earlier part of your career starting out. Does it, you know, your generation is definitely a lot more, wants to be a lot more remote, a lot more independent to some degree. How does that also, how do you think about that for your learning? In other words, when you made the point like how Link could potentially let people to have lunchtime shared. How do you think of that in you know, how does that impact what you can do? Are you getting as much visibility as you think you should to learn this craft? Or are people working in too many silos today?
I think there is a bit of siloing that's going on, but also the internet kind of has made it a lot easier to figure out things. And there have been times, like if I can't figure something out, there's not always someone that I can just ask. So I go to the internet for that. And it is easy enough, especially like with the proliferation of web video, there's so much more that I can not just like read the forum and try and hopefully like convert that to my screen and figure out what they're talking about in text, but actually watch something and figuring it out. And there have actually been times where I've been in a room of editors and not wanted to bug someone else. So I look something up online, and the answer that I found is written by someone in the room with me. So it is like a little bit of that, but I found definitely since being at GBH, it's a little easier, because before here I was freelancing for small production companies, and I would be the one that needed to come up with the answers to whatever the problems were. And I've got a network now that I can also like shoot a text to or whatever, and get some answers that way. So I think in some ways there is a bit of the siloing, but because the world is becoming more connected, that also makes it easier to be in your silo and connect with other people at the same time.
I know one assistant editor who's a big fan of the, I don't know, ask you this, is it a big fan of the Avid editors the assistant editors of Facebook is a big page that I know he's part of.
So I'm not on that. I'm on the editors of Facebook, but not the assistant editors of Facebook.
So
I should check that out.
I agree. There's good. Glad you did too.
Yeah. So when you look at challenges, so Gretchen, we'll come back to you. Do you see, when you look at the production needs that you have, because they're obviously varying from, you know, big budget, you know, longer form to your short form. What are the kind of technology challenges your team's facing and/or operational challenges you guys are facing because you're probably, things are moving really fast in your space?
Yeah, no, they are, and definitely keeping up with technology and making sure our technology is keeping up with the speed that we need it to is a challenge. I mean, I would say one challenge that I face as sort of someone who, manages the team and manages the facility is as these new tools and toys come out, really looking at like, what do we really want? Like, what would be really awesome and cool to have versus what do we really need? Like, 8K is cool, but do I need it when the content is going to be this big? So I would say that's one of the challenges I face, and then getting the investments in all of them too.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's interesting you make the point about better, faster, cheaper, pick two. I actually believe in a long form that it is all three, because I do think, reality or not, I've always believed pick two, but the reality is, as an industry, we're making people go to all three, and it is, we are pushing it, but I will say we are doing things faster, cheaper, and a bit better, I think, but I do agree, we look at one particular situation, it's difficult.
But the technology really helps with that. I mean, that's what's going to help get us there.
It's going to have to be technology innovation to help that, because people need storytellers need the time they need to do the story, so the question is, how can technology get rid of all the things that get in the way of storytelling?
I'm not 100% sure. Is this working?
Yeah, it is.
Do you know Hawk Koch? He's like a film producer. I met him a few weeks ago, and he's been Marathon Man, like all those old school stuff. And he was asking why it takes longer now to cut a movie than it used to. That in the old days, in the old system, dailies to rough cut was a couple months,
I think it has to do with producers.
Well, does it have to do with producers, or is one of the problems that we can, when you had to cut film, you had to make a decision, right? And it was a big pain in the butt
To go back.
to go to trim mode. You had to your trims had to come to me, and I had to resynchronize them and bring them back. Is it that? Do we have too many?
Well, this is what I do know. This is that when I used to cut a film back in the day prior to Avid, my EDL edit decision list was somewhere in the 200 edits, and that was a lot. People thought that was a lot, 250. I'm never under 1,000 now
For
the same duration of content. So. Does it take longer? I don't know. I'm getting faster. I'm getting better. I'm getting smarter. I don't know if you know this, but I'm pretty amazing.
I was telling
you were told that, right?
I was telling him my assistant this week was like, "Oh, Jazz, you're on the panel with Steve Arnett."
No, it's just now.
But she was like, "That's a great panel."
No, it's just now. The thing is, though, but I do think that a lot of the reasons, if there are, it's funny. It's this, again, it goes back to this perspective of what is the forces that are on the making of production. And yes, we are getting forced to make stuff faster, as I outlined. And yes, so there's a certain group of people who have an audience that's big enough that they can support a different model. But at the same time, there are other influences, and that's the producer influence. I find very often that I'm with, not so much at Frontline, but when I'm working on independent projects, and there's a bunch of people who want to weigh in on a particular cut. I mean, I'm cutting something right now that I spent, 20 hours cutting. It's beautiful, it's perfect, it's lovely. I'm tearing it apart as soon as I leave here because the producer says, I need more of this, this, and this, and this. Well, I don't have any of that in there. I've got to go take stuff out and put stuff back in. So there are other kinds of pressures that make things take longer. But I also like what you said about the 8K stuff. I often wonder about whether or not, technology is getting ahead of our ability to consume, especially if so much of it's going to be on the mobile. So we still shoot 1080p. Stereo at Frontline. My one experience with 5.1 was a disaster where we were in the mix and it was a beautiful thing, and we went into the edit room and it sounded a completely different mix, and it freaked me out. So we went back. We kind of jumped back to stereo.
Well, Steve, let me ask you a question. So you talked about streaming services and you're cutting for different things.
Yeah.
How has that changed your life from just obviously doing more of a you had a release window of a broadcast on PBS. You're on a lot more services now. How has that changed?
Well, it's funny. One way it's changed is the questions in the interviews are much longer. It's weird because they know they're going to go out on the transparency project. So now the producer asking the question, it wants to make sure they sound intelligent. So, and so they have, it's like they have to be the smartest person in the room sometimes. So that sometimes comes out. So I'm like, shh, okay, yeah, shh. That's another reason why I love Avid Script Sync, for example. I'm a big fan of the Avid Script Sync just because I can go right to what I'm looking for. And Phrase Find is even more spectacular because even if you don't know what's on the script, you can kind of search for it. Do we know what Phrase Find and Script Syncs are? Okay. Yeah. So so it's those are tools that help me go faster and help me able to so for the Transparency Project, it's another whole stream. A producer will hand an editor a script, not me, but our friend, and he'll assemble it, and all he does is phrase find and script sync and just put it together, and there it is, and it basically has a rough cut and no time flat. So so what's happened is it's changed the content because every piece of content that's recorded has to have multiple resources going out. So it's not just for my one silo. It has to be more spread out, thought about in all of them at the same time.
Do the producers give you a chance to watch everything? Like how much, what percentage of the stuff for the piece are you able to watch?
If the film is 51 minutes long, I've seen 2 hours.
And how much was shot?
300 to 1. So 300 hours. So I've seen 2 of the 300 hours. But that's because I'm cutting in 4.5 weeks.
Yeah.
It's not, if I was, my friend here.
Yeah, but you probably got a better retirement plan.
Yeah.
So thanks. So I do want to close with one last tough question because I'm
Sure.
not the only one that's going to be on video making a prediction.
Okay.
You all have to join me. Pete, I'm going to start with you. What do you think? What one big prediction do you think is going to come to fruition in 2020? It's going to change the way we all work.
I'm hoping some of the AI stuff comes to help out, to really just be able to kind of, as I'm organizing the footage, have it know what that footage also needs to go to. And I think something like that, we're probably not too far off because there's bits and pieces of it now, but something like that in the next year would be great, so that I know that if I'm going through this, the computer knows this footage needs to be transcoded to this codec and organized this way, and I don't have to spend as much time thinking about that sort of stuff to get the footage out the door to the editors.
So you think AI will help maybe?
Yeah.
Gretchen, how about you? Prediction for you?
Well, I think that's something that's great about the advancement of technology is that these tools have also become so much more accessible, as we were saying. Like, these kids coming out of school who know how to shoot, know how to edit, know how to use After Effects, and I think that those tools becoming more accessible has just really opened up the diversity of voices that we're seeing in our makers and in production, and we need that. Brands need that. We all need that. And that is definitely a trend in more diversity and recognizing that homogeny in our makers is not good for any of us. Yeah. So it's up to us to all support that diversity, and that's what's exciting for me.
Oh, great. Woody, how about you?
Can I make it a wish?
You can if you like. Yeah.
My wish for 2020, and sooner the better, is that PT Control creates an app set for Media Composer. I love it. I work with it all the time, but I would love it to have the Avid icons that I'm used to. I do map my keyboard, but I started using PT Control because I stabbed my hand cutting an avocado by mistake. So I was trying to do more one-handed stuff. You guys might have some even better thing in the pipeline like you were talking about, but I loved being able to use a touch screen to edit and to mix and to do everything, So that's my wish for 2020.
Well, they all work for him, so there's the guy.
Yeah.
Steve, I'll close with you.
All right,
What's a big prediction for us?
Well, here's the thing. It's more of a philosophical meditation, which is that I actually believe very strongly that we're in just the dawning of this age of media creation, and that if you think back to the time of less than 100 years, the first films were made, right? So we're very much in the infancy of this classical art that we call film and television production, and I think that the democratization of that has had some negativity to fake news and other things, deep fake, etc. But I believe, just like when the original printing press was created to print Bibles, that the printing press had its time of chaos after that there will be a resurgence of content for viewers that will combat this evil of fake news and deep fake. I believe in the democratization of the content creators everywhere, no matter it's on an iPhone or on broadcast I firmly believe that. I'd like to see that start happening before 2024.
Well, I agree with you. That's
Okay.
great.
Okay, thank you.
So we want to thank our whole panel here. Thank you so much. And I just want to thank the time and you gave, but I want to open up for a little bit of questions. We've got a few minutes for questions from the audience. Now, actually, where's the microphone? Oh, it's over here. We have mics on the sides. This is a chance to ask some pretty esteemed people here any questions you may have. Any questions for the panel?
Come on now.
He has Suri asking questions over here. Come on, somebody's got to
Somebody.
break through and ask a question.
All right, so you guys need to be warmed up, I can see. So I know that Dave was talking a little bit earlier about how technology companies like Avid really need the community, need input from the community. And I'm curious, as media makers, how you as a panel, you guys can do it one at a time or what, how do you get input from your audience such that, and how does that influence the media you're making?
I sort of semi-described what we do. We do test screenings, and we create, we do Q&As. Most of the A's we throw out, but we create a Q&A sheet, and you know, there's a metric, like we ask a certain number of questions that have like a 1, hate to 10 love, or 1. So like a question, like super important question is, would you suggest this movie to a friend? Never to definitely. Do you like our main character, Peter? Hate, love, So there's like certain questions you ask. You decide what is important for people to get and like, and characters to love or hate, and you get numbers. You get raw numbers. You look at those numbers, and you're like, it's working. How to Survive a Plague? For a long time, we're trying to figure out how to get people to love Bob Rafsky. It was important to us that you had to really care about Bob Rafsky for the movie to work. And for a long time, we couldn't figure out how to, I had an idea, but we as a team couldn't figure it out. And it ultimately came down to, how did he die? How do we present his death? And, the director was hung up on a particular piece of footage of the announcing of his death, but it was from a person that we had already met and we didn't like. So like, it gets back to that whole feeling thing I was talking about before. So like, person we don't like delivers an important piece of information about something you want the audience to care about. It's hard to make it work. So yeah, so we do screenings, and we have questionnaires, and we really care what the audience thinks in a certain way. And I was kind of joking about throwing out most of the A's. A lot of times when you ask an audience for feedback, they feel like they must say something negative to be smart. If you're going to say something in front of a whole room, it's not like, I loved it. Like that's not going to work. But if you point and nitpick and, I wish you had shot this, well, we didn't shoot that. So how about giving us something that that we can work with? Anyhow, that's how we do it.
What I like to do, I'm a second screener. I'm one of those people who second screen. I love Twitter whilst watching Frontline, and so if you ever watch a Frontline, definitely jump into the feed there. I will answer questions. They don't let me answer questions into content because I'm the editor. But at the same time, I answer a lot of content questions about editing and storytelling, and I really like doing that, and I like the feedback, and it's part of my way of giving back sort of my craft back into the community. So that's how I get that answer. and using technology.
In advertising, we have the great benefit of full data and analytics teams telling us how the audience feels about what we do. But there is always that challenge of like, we think it's really great, creative, interesting, cool work, but like, is it helping the product? Is it helping the brand? Is it really the voice of the brand? So you really have to like figure out the right balance there.
Well, thanks. Pete,
Yeah,
last
I
word?
mean, we do kind of similar to what Steve said. Our shows have hashtags and web tags to see, and we kind of gauge the engagement that we get from that and the numbers we feel from that, and kind of push our content towards what the people are talking about when they watch the show, or which shows are getting people to actually click through to like find the recipes that were on the cooking show or things like that. And so we try and push the content in the way that we see the people are like using it anyway.
Well, it's different world. Well, if I don't end this, they're going to throw something at me, the production team here. But the panel will be here. Please, at the end, if you want to come up and ask any questions, please feel free. So I want to thank the panel again. Really appreciate the time you spent.